On a cold October night in 1962, a young mother named Sarah Mitchell tucked her 7-year-old daughter into bed and told her the same story her grandmother had whispered to her decades earlier. It was a tale about spirits that wandered the earth on Halloween night, searching for children who stayed awake past midnight. Sarah thought it was just another harmless bedtime story, something to help her daughter drift off to sleep. But when she woke up the next morning, her daughter was gone. The bedroom window was wide open, and small, muddy footprints led from the bed to the windowsill and then simply vanished into thin air. What Sarah didn't know was that this wasn't just a story. What she had dismissed as folklore was actually a warning that had been passed down through generations for a very real reason. That morning, Sarah discovered something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The myth she thought was make-believe had been protecting families for over 2 centuries. Now, you've probably heard countless spooky stories during Halloween season. Most of them are just that, stories designed to give you chills and thrill. But what if I told you that some of the most terrifying Halloween myths we've all grown up with weren't myths at all? What if these supposedly fictional tales were actually based on documented events that really happened? I've spent the last 6 months digging through historical records, police reports, and eyewitness accounts from around the world. What I discovered will completely change how you think about Halloween folklore. These aren't just campfire stories or urban legends. These are 5 Halloween myths that turned out to be absolutely terrifyingly true. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why certain Halloween traditions exist. Don't forget to leave, like, and subscribe for more mystery stories. The first myth that'll make your skin crawl involves something that happens every Halloween night in small towns across America. You've probably heard versions of this story before. Parents warn their children never to answer the door after a certain time on Halloween night, because something other than trick-or-treaters might be standing on the other side. Most people assume this is just overprotective parenting, but the truth is far more disturbing. In 1978, police in Millfield, Connecticut received 17 separate reports of children describing the exact same visitor. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, a figure dressed in what appeared to be a vintage costume would knock on doors after 10 o'clock. The children who answered described someone wearing clothes that looked decades out of date. Here's where it gets really strange. Every single child who reported this encounter mentioned the same specific detail without any communication between families. They all said the figure asked the same question in the exact same words. "Are your parents home, and do they remember me?" When the children said no, or called for their parents, the figure would simply vanish. Not walk away, not run off, just disappear completely. The police initially dismissed these reports as overactive imaginations until they started investigating the historical records of the town. What they found was a pattern that stretched back over a century. Every few years, usually during particularly cold Halloween nights, the same reports would surface. Different children, different families, but always the same description and always the same mysterious disappearance. Detective Frank Morrison, who led the investigation, told reporters that what bothered him most wasn't just the consistency of the reports. It was what they found when they dug deeper into the town's history. In 1892, a traveling salesman named Theodore Blackwood had gone door to door in Millfield on Halloween night, asking families if they remembered him from previous visits. The problem was, nobody had ever seen him before, and his sales record showed he'd never been to Connecticut. The next morning, Blackwood was found frozen to death in the town square, still clutching a bag of what appeared to be children's toys. The coroner's report noted something peculiar. Despite being found in freezing conditions, Blackwood's body showed no signs of hypothermia. Witnesses reported that he looked exactly as he had the night before, as if death had simply paused him in time. What makes this story even more unsettling is that the encounters didn't stop after Blackwood's death. They continued every few years with the same figure, wearing the same outdated clothes, asking the same haunting question. The children's descriptions matched old photographs of Theodore Blackwood perfectly. right down to a distinctive scar on his left hand that only family members would have known about. This brings us to our second myth, one that you've definitely heard before but probably never took seriously. It's the idea that mirrors become doorways on Halloween night, allowing things from the other side to peek through or even cross over into our world. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the residents of Ashford Manor in Yorkshire, England thought so too, until 1995. Ashford Manor had been converted into a small hotel, and the owners decided to capitalize on its spooky reputation by hosting Halloween events. They decorated the grand ballroom with antique mirrors they'd found in the manor's basement, thinking it would create the perfect eerie atmosphere. What they didn't know was that these mirrors had been stored in the basement for over 50 years for a very specific reason. On Halloween night, guests started reporting strange reflections in the mirrors. At first, it seemed like typical Halloween party pranks. Someone would catch a glimpse of a figure that didn't match anyone at the party, or they'd see movement in the mirror when no one was standing in front of it. But as the night progressed, the reports became more frequent and more disturbing. Margaret Henley, one of the hotel guests, was touching up her makeup in one of the antique mirrors when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Standing behind her reflection was a woman in a Victorian dress, but when Margaret turned around, nobody was there. Even more terrifying, the woman in the mirror wasn't copying Margaret's movements. Instead, she seemed to be trying to communicate something, pointing frantically at something outside the mirror's view. Within an hour, 3 more guests reported similar encounters with the same Victorian woman. Security cameras later revealed something that hotel staff still can't explain. The footage showed guests reacting to something in the mirrors, stepping back in fear, but the mirrors themselves appeared normal on camera. Whatever was happening was only visible to people looking directly into the glass. The hotel's historian later discovered that the mirrors had belonged to Eleanor Ashford, the manor's original owner, who had died in 1943 under mysterious circumstances. According to family records, Eleanor had become obsessed with mirrors in the months before her death, claiming she could see things in them that others couldn't. Her family had removed all the mirrors from the house after finding her dead in front of her bedroom mirror, her hand pressed against the glass, as if she'd been trying to push through it. But here's what makes this story absolutely chilling. The hotel staff decided to investigate Eleanor's claims by checking historical records from Halloween nights at the manor. They found diary entries from servants dating back to the 1920s, all describing the same phenomenon in Halloween nights. Mirrors throughout the house would show figures that weren't there, and Eleanor would spend hours talking to reflections that only she could see. The really disturbing part came when they found Eleanor's final diary entry, written on Halloween night, 1943. She described seeing dozens of people in the mirrors, all trying to warn her about something terrible that was coming. Her last words, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were, "They're not reflections anymore. They're windows, and something is coming through." That brings us to our third myth, and this one will make you think twice about those innocent jack-o'-lanterns sitting on your porch. We've all heard the story about how carved pumpkins are supposed to ward off evil spirits, but most people treat it like a cute tradition. The truth behind this practice is far more serious than anyone realizes. In the small farming town of Millbrook, Iowa, they learned this lesson the hard way in 1989. The town had always been proud of their elaborate Halloween decorations, and that year, the city council decided to break tradition. Instead of the usual jack-o'-lanterns, they opted for plastic decorations and electric lights, thinking it would be safer and more modern. What happened next defied all logical explanation. Starting on October 25th, livestock throughout the town began acting erratically. Cows refused to enter their barns after sunset. Horses would panic and break through fences, and farm dogs would howl continuously from dusk until dawn. At first, farmers blamed it on an approaching storm system, but the weather remained clear. By October 29th, the situation had escalated beyond animal behavior. Residents started reporting that their homes felt different after dark. Temperatures would drop suddenly in certain rooms, doors would creak open on their own, and many families described feeling watched by invisible eyes. Children refused to sleep alone, and several adults reported nightmares so vivid they woke up with physical marks that matched their dream injuries. Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, a local physician, documented 17 cases of patients experiencing identical symptoms. They all described feeling drained of energy, seeing shadowy figures in their peripheral vision, and hearing whispers in a language they couldn't understand. What made her investigation even more compelling was that these symptoms only occurred in homes without traditional jack-o'-lanterns. The breaking point came on Halloween night itself. The town's emergency services received over 40 calls reporting the same phenomenon. Families described dark shapes moving across their yards, pressing against windows, and gathering around homes like they were searching for a way inside. But here's the crucial detail that nobody could ignore. These shapes avoided houses that still displayed carved pumpkins. Mrs. Helen Crawford, an elderly resident who had lived in Millbrook for over 70 years, provided the key to understanding what was happening. She had refused to remove her jack-o'-lanterns despite the city council's modern approach, and her property remained completely undisturbed throughout the entire ordeal. When pressed for an explanation, she shared something her Irish grandmother had taught her decades earlier. According to Helen, the jack-o'-lantern tradition wasn't just about decoration. It was a protective ward that had been used in Ireland for centuries to keep malevolent spirits from entering homes during Samhain, when the barrier between the living world and the spirit realm was at its thinnest. The carved faces weren't meant to be cute or scary for humans. They were designed to confuse and frighten entities that couldn't distinguish between the carved faces and real human expressions. The town quickly reinstated their jack-o'-lantern tradition, and the disturbances stopped immediately. But the experience left lasting questions about why certain Halloween practices had survived for so many generations when their original purposes had been forgotten. This leads us directly into our fourth myth, which involves something that happens in cemeteries on Halloween night. You've probably heard people say that visiting graveyards on Halloween is dangerous, that spirits are more active and more likely to follow you home. Most rational people dismiss this as superstition, but the groundskeepers at Riverside Cemetery in Salem, Massachusetts, have documentation that suggests otherwise. For over 30 years, head groundskeeper Marcus Webb kept detailed logs of unusual incidents that occurred specifically on Halloween night. What started as a simple security measure turned into a comprehensive record of paranormal activity that followed consistent patterns year after year. So there you have it, 5 Halloween myths that turned out to be terrifyingly real. From Theodore Blackwood's eternal door-to-door visits to Eleanor Ashford's mirror warnings, from protective jack-o'-lanterns to active cemetery spirits, and Sarah Mitchell's daughter, who learned too late that some bedtime stories are actually warnings. These weren't just campfire tales or overactive imaginations. They were documented events that happened to real people, leaving behind evidence that's impossible to ignore. The next time someone shares a Halloween myth with you, maybe don't be so quick to dismiss it. After all, our ancestors didn't create these traditions for entertainment. They created them for protection. So this Halloween night, when you're deciding whether to follow those old superstitions, ask yourself this: are you willing to bet your safety on the assumption that it's all just make-believe?